They say a last will is final. But my late wife had one more card to play. My stepson Victor slammed down a DNA test at the reading, claiming to be her biological son, demanding my fortune. The lawyer unfolded a sealed letter she'd left. The first line revealed a secret. Victor wasn't her son. The real heir was the stepdaughter who never asked for a thing. Frank had buried his wife Eleanor just 3 months before that reading. She was the kind of woman who kept a diary locked and a second set of books nobody knew about. Victor, the stepson she'd raised since he was 5, walked into that room already counting his inheritance. His DNA test was a grenade with the pin pulled. The lawyer, a man named Crawley, who'd handled Eleanor's affairs for 20 years, simply adjusted his glasses and slid a cream envelope from a locked drawer. Everyone expected a fight over percentages. What they got was a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The real question wasn't whether Victor was blood. The real question was whether Eleanor had ever been free to tell the truth at all. To understand why that question mattered, you have to go back 26 years, before the fortune, before the betrayal. Back when Frank Colleton was just a widower with a young daughter and no intention of ever marrying again. He had built his real estate firm from a single rental property into a portfolio that stretched across 3 states, and he had done it with a kind of quiet ferocity that made competitors underestimate him exactly once. His daughter Clara was 8 then, already the kind of child who would rather read a book than ask for a new toy. And Frank figured that was enough. Love was a door he had closed when his first wife died in a car accident. He was 39 and perfectly content to grow old alone with a ledger and a garden. Then he met Eleanor Barnes at a hospital charity gala in 1998. She was 34, dressed in a navy suit that had been carefully mended at the hem, and she was trying to slip out the side door before the auction started. Frank was doing the same thing. They nearly collided near the coat check, and when she laughed, it was the kind of laugh that sounded like it had been locked away for a while. She told him she only came because her son's school required volunteer hours and she had promised to bid on a cake. He told her he only came because his accountant said it was tax-deductible. They left together, walked 6 blocks to a diner, and talked until the staff started stacking chairs. Eleanor was a widow, she said. She had a 5-year-old boy named Victor. Her husband had died when Victor was an infant, and she never spoke about him beyond that. Frank noticed the way her voice closed tight around the subject, and he didn't push. He knew that silence. He had worn it himself. They married 11 months later. The wedding was small, just Clara, Victor, a judge, and a handful of friends. From the outside, it looked like a quiet victory over loneliness. And for the first few years, it was. Frank adored Eleanor. She brought a warmth into his house that he hadn't realized was missing, and Clara took to her so naturally that the word stepmother never felt accurate. Victor was more complicated. Even at 6, he had a way of smiling that made Frank feel like he was being measured for something. The boy was bright, undeniably, but there was a hunger in him that didn't come from lack. He would ask Frank how much his watch cost, not out of curiosity, but as if he were cataloging assets. Frank wrote it off as childhood insecurity. He told himself the kid had lost a father and was trying to figure out where the solid ground was. What Frank didn't know was that the solid ground Eleanor stood on was riddled with cracks that had been there long before he met her. There was a man named Rourke, a figure from her past who had once held something over her so tightly that she agreed to raise a child that was not her own. And every few years that man would send a letter reminding her that the secret was still alive. But all of that was still buried in 1998. Frank focused on building his company and raising Clara. Victor grew up in the shadow of a fortune, expecting its weight to settle on his shoulders. By the time he was 17, he had developed a habit of talking about Frank's money as though it were already his. He would say things at dinner like, "When I take over the firm," and Frank would correct him gently, "If you earn it." Victor would smile, and the smile never reached his eyes. Clara, meanwhile, graduated valedictorian of her high school, worked summers at the company's front desk, and never once asked for a position she hadn't earned. The contrast between the two children sat in the house like an unspoken weather system. Eleanor saw it. She would flinch when Victor made his pronouncements, and then she would go quiet for hours. The cancer showed up in Eleanor's body the way long-held secrets often do, silently, and then all at once. Pancreatic, stage 4. The doctors gave her 8 months, and she lasted 9. In the final weeks, she summoned Crawley, the family attorney who had handled her affairs since before she met Frank. She dictated a letter in a closed room, sealed it with wax, and gave him one instruction. "If there is ever a dispute about my estate, open this, not before." Frank buried Eleanor on a damp Tuesday in late October. Clara held his arm. Victor stood across the grave, dry-eyed, already on his phone. 3 months later, the reading of the will was set for a Wednesday morning in Crawley's office, a room full of leather chairs and the particular silence that precedes a reckoning. Frank arrived early, wearing the same gray suit he had worn to the funeral. Clara was beside him, her hand resting in his. Victor entered 10 minutes late, flanked by a lawyer no one had seen before. A thin man with a briefcase that looked expensive and a smile that didn't belong in a room that still smelled of grief. Before Crawley could even greet them, Victor's lawyer placed a folder on the mahogany table. Inside was a DNA test, letterhead from a reputable lab, and a single sentence that Victor read aloud as if he had practiced it. "I am the biological son of Eleanor Colleton, and by law, the sole heir to her estate." Frank's breath stopped in his chest. Crawley didn't flinch. He simply opened a drawer and pulled out the envelope Eleanor had left behind, its seal still unbroken. "Before we address that," Crawley said quietly, "your mother wanted you to hear this first." And the room fell into a silence so absolute that Frank could hear the wax begin to crack. The wax cracked and fell away, and Crawley unfolded the letter with the care of a man handling evidence. The handwriting was Eleanor's. I would have recognized it anywhere. The slight leftward slant, the way she crossed her T's with a little curve. He cleared his throat and read aloud. "To my husband Frank, my daughter Clara, and the man who calls himself my son. If you are hearing this, I am dead, and the truth has finally found its way into the light." Victor's lawyer, the thin man with the expensive briefcase, set both hands flat on the table as if to steady himself for what was coming. Victor himself had not moved. He was staring at the letter the way a man stares at a door he didn't expect to open. Crawley continued, and every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "Victor is not my biological child. I have never given birth. The DNA test he is surely waving around right now is either a forgery or a tragic misreading of a sample I planted years ago for just this occasion. I knew this day would come." Victor made a sound that was not quite a word. His lawyer started to say something about admissibility, about chain of custody. But Crawley didn't stop reading. "Victor was brought to me on June 2nd, 1993, when he was 3 days old. The man who delivered him was Martin Rourke. He told me I would raise this boy as my own, that I would never tell anyone the truth, and that if I refused, he would release photographs that would destroy everything I loved. The photographs were of a night I did not choose. A night I buried until now." The room tightened around me. I felt the blood leave my face, then rush back hot. Rourke, I had heard that name only once before. Eleanor had whispered it once, in her sleep, during the last week of her life, and I had thought it was a fever dream. Now I understood. Martin Rourke was a man I knew from business circles. A fixer, a shadow broker who traded in secrets. I had never met him personally, but I knew his reputation. He was the kind of man who could make people disappear, not in the physical sense, but by erasing their ability to fight back. Clara's hand found mine under the table. Her fingers were cold. Victor's face was now a strange color, a blotchy red at the jaw. "She's lying," he said, but his voice had no conviction. "She wrote that under medication. The DNA test proves." He didn't finish because Crawley finally lowered the letter and looked at him with the patient sorrow of a man who has seen too many wills and too little honesty. "Your test," Crawley said, "was based on a hair sample your lawyer claims came from Eleanor's hairbrush. But your mother's letter directs us to a sealed medical record that proves she had a hysterectomy 2 years before you were born, at St. Mary's Hospital. The surgeon's affidavit is attached. A woman without a uterus cannot conceive a child, so whatever sample you tested did not come from Eleanor Colleton. It came from someone else, likely the biological mother, who Mr. Rourke also supplied the sample to ensure the test would read positive if ever the boy questioned his origin." The air left the room. Victor's lawyer took a step back, as if the table had suddenly become radioactive. Victor stared at Crawley, then at me, then at Clara. I saw something collapse behind his eyes. Not guilt, that would come later, perhaps. What I saw was the disintegration of a story he had believed his entire life. Because if Eleanor's letter was true, Victor had been used as a weapon before he could speak. But that didn't excuse the weapon he had chosen to become. Crawley placed the letter on the table and folded his hands. "Mrs. Colleton's estate is straightforward, now that the claim of biological parenthood is settled. The sole heir to her personal fortune and her share of the family company is the daughter she raised and loved, Clara." Victor's lawyer tried to speak again, this time about contesting the letter's validity. But Crawley lifted a single finger, and the man fell silent as if by reflex. "You may contest," Crawley said. "You will lose. Moreover, the letter names Martin Rourke as the source of the fraud. That triggers certain legal protections for the estate, and I suspect certain criminal inquiries. I have already made a copy of this letter for the district attorney." A new kind of silence descended. This one was not the silence of shock, it was the silence of consequences being calculated in real time. Victor's lawyer glanced at his client, at the door, at his expensive briefcase. Then he did the thing that, in retrospect, I should have expected. He packed his papers, closed his briefcase, and said, "Mr. Crawley, my firm will be withdrawing from this matter effective immediately." Victor looked like a man watching his parachute fail. "You can't leave," he said. "I can, and I must," said the lawyer. "I was hired under the assumption that the DNA test was legitimate. I will not be party to what appears to be a criminal fraud." And with that, the thin man walked out of the office, leaving Victor standing alone with nothing but the wreckage of his plan. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a deep, grinding sorrow. Because the boy I had raised, however difficult, was not a boy at all, he was a piece moved on a board by a man who had hurt my wife in ways I couldn't yet fully imagine. And that man, Martin Rourke, was still out there. The letter didn't explain why Rourke had given Eleanor a child and forced her to raise him. It didn't say what he gained. But I knew Rourke's type. He didn't do anything without a long-term calculation. And if Victor was his piece, then this entire scene, the DNA test, the will reading, the public humiliation, might still be part of a larger game I couldn't see. Then came the pivot. Crawley, who had been watching me with an expression that suggested he wasn't finished, said Frank. There's a second part to the letter. She asked me to read it only after the legal matters were settled. If you wish, I'll read it now. Victor had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Clara was sitting very straight, her face pale but composed. I nodded. Crawley turned the page. To Frank, the only man I ever loved. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I was afraid that if you knew about Rourke, you would have gone after him, and he would have destroyed you. He has connections, Frank. He has evidence of things that would unravel our family company. I raised Victor because I had to, but I left you this letter because I knew one day Victor would come for what he believed was his. There is more I need you to know. The blackmail didn't stop with the baby. Rourke has been demanding payments from me for 26 years, funneled through a shell corporation that he used to buy shares in our company. As of today, he owns 23% of Colleton Enterprises. He's been waiting for this moment. If you read this, and Victor's claim fails, Rourke will activate a hostile takeover using the leverage he's accumulated. He doesn't just want the money. He wants to destroy everything you built because of something that happened between him and my first husband, something I only learned years later. I'm so sorry, Frank. I tried to protect you by staying silent, but silence built his weapon. The only way to stop him is to find the original photographs, the ones he used to blackmail me. They're in a safety deposit box under a fake name. The key is with someone I trusted. Her name is Agatha Morrow. She lives in a small town in Oregon. She knows nothing of what happened, but she has the key. I'm giving you this now because you're going to need it. And just like that, the center of the fight shifted. It wasn't about Victor anymore. It wasn't even about the inheritance. It was about a shadow figure who had been manipulating our family for decades, and who now held enough shares to trigger a corporate war that could cost 4,000 employees their jobs and my daughter her legacy. Martin Rourke was no longer a name whispered in a nightmare. He was an enemy with a head start. I looked at Crawley. You've known this the whole time? He shook his head. She gave me the sealed letter with instructions. I didn't know the contents until now, but I suspected something had been done to her. The way she carried herself, constantly looking over her shoulder. When you mentioned Rourke's name earlier, I knew she had finally decided to arm you. Victor lifted his head. His eyes were red, but whether from rage or grief, I couldn't tell. This Rourke, he said, his voice cracking. He's my real father? He used me? Crawley regarded him without hostility. The letter doesn't identify your biological parents. It only states that Eleanor was not your mother. As for Rourke, he appears to have been the architect. I suspect, Victor, you are as much a victim as anyone else in this room. But you made your choices. Those last 5 words hung in the air. Victim or not, Victor had walked in here with a falsified DNA test, ready to take everything, and now he was learning that he had been a puppet from the start. I stood up. The chair scraped the floor. Crawley, I need copies of everything. Every document, every affidavit. The letter, the medical records. I'm going to Oregon. Clara stood too. Dad, we don't know anything about this Agatha Morrow. It could be a trap. It could be, I said. But it's the only lead we have. Rourke has a quarter of the company. If he moves, we're in a proxy fight we might not win. And I am not losing what I built to the man who hurt your mother. Victor stood then. Unsteadily, he looked at me, and for the first time since he was 5 years old, I saw something other than calculation in his eyes. It was fear, but not of me. I can help, he said. I know things. Rourke contacted me 4 years ago. He told me about the DNA test, said I was Eleanor's biological son. He gave me documents. He told me to wait until after she died, then claim the inheritance. He said it was justice. The room went cold again. Of course, Rourke had been playing both sides. He planted Victor as the claimant, knowing the claim would fail, knowing the letter would surface, and he did it to force my hand, to flush out the evidence that could destroy him. He wanted me to find the photographs because they represented a threat to him, and he was betting he could intercept me before I got to them. That was his real move. The inheritance play was a decoy. I looked at Crawley. Get security. Now. And that's when the phone on Crawley's desk rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Crawley picked it up. He listened. His face turned to stone. He hung up and said, "That was the building manager. There's a man in the lobby asking for Frank Colleton. He says his name is Martin Rourke. He's on his way up." In that instant, I understood that the fight had never been about a DNA test. It was about a man who had waited 26 years to close a circle. And if I didn't stop him, the circle would close around my daughter's throat. The door opened before I could tell Crawley to lock it. Martin Rourke walked into that law office the way a landlord walks into a property he already owns. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that had never seen a department store. His smile was the kind you see on men who have been winning for so long they no longer remember what losing feels like. Behind him, 2 men in dark jackets stood just outside the door. They didn't enter. They didn't need to. "Frank Colleton," Rourke said, extending a hand I did not take. "We've never formally met. I thought it was time." I didn't move. Clara shifted beside me, her hand now gripping my arm. Victor had gone completely still, the way prey goes still when a predator passes overhead. Crawley was the only one who seemed unruffled. He quietly moved the letter and documents into a folder and placed it behind his desk, unhurried, the gesture of a man who had seen too much law to be impressed by a dramatic entrance. "You're the man who blackmailed my wife," I said. My voice came out flat, the way it does when the anger is so deep it has no surface. Rourke's smile didn't flicker. "I'm the man who collected on a debt your wife's first husband incurred before you ever met her. But that's a long story, and I suspect you have questions. May I sit?" He gestured to the chair Victor had vacated. I said nothing. He sat anyway, crossing one leg over the other, the picture of calm. "Victor, good to see you again," he said, without looking at Victor. "You performed admirably. The DNA test, the dramatic entrance. I couldn't have asked for a better catalyst. You flushed out the letter exactly as I needed." Victor's mouth opened, but no sound came. The boy who had come in here demanding a fortune now looked like a discarded tool. Rourke turned his attention back to me. "Here's what you need to understand, Frank. Your wife Eleanor was married to a man named David Keene before you. David Keene owed me a great deal of money. When he died, the debt didn't die with him. It passed to his widow. But Eleanor had nothing. Then she met you, a man building an empire. I saw an opportunity. I had leverage, photographs from a night she was drugged and compromised. Photographs that would have sent her to prison or worse. I gave her a choice: raise a child for me and keep the secret, or lose everything. She made the sensible choice." Clara made a sound, something between a gasp and a growl. I held up a hand, kept my eyes on Rourke. "What child?" "Victor," Rourke said. "The son of a woman who worked for me. A woman who couldn't keep him. I needed the boy placed in a stable home. A wealthy home, where I could keep an eye on him and eventually use him. I chose Eleanor because she was vulnerable, and because she married you. The boy was a long-term investment." Victor's voice came out raw. "You used me. My whole life you let me believe I was someone I wasn't, and you used me. Rourke finally looked at him. You were fed, clothed, educated, and given access to a fortune you'd never have earned on your own. I'd say you were compensated. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes violence. I felt it in my chest, a pressure building. But I also knew Rourke hadn't come here to gloat. He wanted something. The letter, I said. Eleanor mentioned a safety deposit box. Photographs that could undo you. Rourke's smile finally tightened, just a millimeter. Those photographs are a liability. Not to me, they depict Eleanor and David Keene in a situation that would embarrass your family. But I prefer to keep my tools private. I'm here to offer you a trade. You hand over the photographs and the key, and I will sell my shares back to you at market price. No hostile takeover. Your company remains yours, your daughter's inheritance intact. You never hear from me again. And if I refuse, then I call a special board meeting tomorrow morning. With my 23% and the proxies I've gathered from nervous shareholders, I'll have enough to force you out. By Friday, Colleton Enterprises will belong to me, and your daughter will be left with nothing but a story about her stepmother that will follow her for the rest of her life. The stakes had never been clearer. He was offering me a clean exit at a price, the photographs. But I knew men like Rourke. They didn't honor deals. If I handed over the photographs, I'd be giving him the only evidence of his crimes, and he'd still come for the company later. The only reason he was negotiating was because the photographs were a threat he couldn't ignore. They contained something that could put him in prison. I needed to see those photographs first. "Where's the key?" I asked. Rourke leaned back. "I don't know." Eleanor was clever. She gave it to a woman named Agatha Morrow, a retired nurse in some backwater town called Kinsley, Oregon. I've had people looking for it for months, but Morrow is cautious. She won't open the box for anyone but you, Frank. That's what Eleanor's letter said. You're the only one Morrow will trust. So here we are. You want to save your company? You go to Oregon, retrieve the photographs, and hand them to me. I'll give you 48 hours. After that, the board votes. He stood, brushed an invisible speck from his sleeve. I'll be in touch. He walked out, his two shadows falling in behind him. The door clicked shut, and the room exhaled. Crawley was the first to speak. He's lying about the 48 hours. The board meeting will happen as soon as he can call it. He's giving you just enough time to bring him the photographs, but he won't wait a minute longer than he has to. Victor stood abruptly, his chair tilting backward. I'm going with you. I looked at him. The face I'd seen across the dinner table for years, the face that had always been so sure of its own entitlement, was now raw and undefended. Why? I asked. Because I was his puppet for 26 years. I didn't know it, but every move I made, every time I pushed you, every time I counted your money like it was already mine, he was pulling the strings. I owe this family a debt. Frank, let me help you pay it. Clara, who had been silent, looked at her stepbrother with something that wasn't forgiveness, but wasn't rejection either. Dad, we don't have time to debate. Kinsley is a 6-hour flight. If Rourke's already been looking for the key, we might already be too late. I nodded. Crawley, get me a plane. Victor, you come with me. Clara, you stay here and coordinate with our security team. I want a full lockdown on the corporate offices. No proxy votes move without my approval. And call Marcus Lyle on the board. He owes me a favor from the Hartford deal. Tell him to stall any board meeting until I'm back. Clara started to argue, but I cut her off. You're the majority shareholder now. The board can't move without you in the room. Keep your phone on, and don't leave this city. She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. That was the thing about Clara. She understood battles. 4 hours later, I was on a private charter with Victor, heading west. The cabin was quiet. Victor sat across from me, staring out the window at the clouds, his reflection a ghost over the landscape below. "Did you ever love her?" he asked. "My mother." Eleanor, the question hit me sideways. Yes, more than I ever told her. She was carrying a weight I didn't see. I should have seen it. Victor turned from the window. "I hated you for years. Not because you were cruel, you weren't, but because you were good. Every time you treated me fairly while I was scheming to take your money, it made me feel like the ground was sloping under my feet. I wanted you to be a villain so I could justify what I was planning." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that would change the past. But I watched him, and I saw that something had cracked open in him. Whether it would lead to repair or further breakage, I didn't know yet. We landed in a small regional airport outside Kinsley, Oregon, just before dusk. The town was the kind of place that had one main street, a diner, a hardware store, and a post office with a flag that had seen better days. Agatha Morrow lived at the end of a gravel road in a white clapboard house with a porch swing and a garden overrun with roses. As I walked up the steps, an elderly woman with silver braids and sharp eyes opened the door before I could knock. "You're Frank Colleton," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, my wife sent me." She studied my face, then looked at Victor standing behind me on the path. "And him? He's the boy Eleanor raised. He's here to make things right." Agatha Morrow's expression didn't change. She pulled a key from her pocket, a small brass key tied to a piece of blue ribbon. "Eleanor gave me this 16 years ago. She said one day you'd come for it, and when you did, I was to tell you something. The box isn't here, it's in Portland, at the First Heritage Bank on Morrison Street, box number 612. But that's not the thing she wanted me to say." She paused, and I felt the weight of it before she spoke again. "She wanted you to know that Rourke has a son. A biological son he raised himself. The boy is about Victor's age. His name is Daniel Rourke, and Daniel has been working inside your company for the last 3 years. Eleanor found out just before she died. She didn't know what position he held, but she knew he was inside. And if Rourke is making a move now, it's because Daniel has access to something that can tip the board vote." The ground shifted beneath my feet. A mole inside my own company. For 3 years, Rourke had been grooming not just a public takeover, but an internal sabotage. And if Daniel Rourke was positioned to sway the board, then the 48 hours was a joke. The vote could already be decided. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "Agatha, you've given me more than a key." She nodded once, then looked at Victor with a curious stillness. "You have his eyes. Rourke's. You're his son too, aren't you?" "Not raised, but his blood." Victor's face went white. "I'm what?" "Eleanor never told you. She didn't know until later, when she found an old medical record in Rourke's papers. Your mother was a woman named Iris, but your father was Martin Rourke. You were a child he didn't want to claim publicly, so he gave you away to be used." Victor staggered back a step. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The man who had been pulling his strings his entire life, the man he'd thought was just a blackmailer, was his father, and that father had cast him as a pawn. I caught his arm before he fell. "Steady. You're not him. You never have to be." He looked at me with a desperation I hadn't seen in a grown man's eyes before. "What do I do?" "You help me stop him," I said. "You know how he thinks. You just found out you have a half-brother inside my company. That's information we can use." We drove straight to Portland, through the night. Victor was silent most of the way, processing. I called Clara from the car, told her about Daniel Rourke. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Daniel Rourke is our chief financial officer. He joined 3 years ago, right after the last CFO retired. He's been in every board meeting, every strategy session. He knows everything. The CFO. The man holding the company's financial levers. If he was Rourke's son, he could manipulate valuations, sway investor confidence, trigger a crisis of liquidity that would force the board to accept a hostile offer just to survive. And he'd had 3 years to lay the groundwork. "Get Marcus Lyle on the phone now," I said. "Tell him to freeze all financial authorizations until I'm back. No transactions over $10,000 without dual approval. And Clara, don't confront Daniel directly. He doesn't know we know." "I understand," she said. "Dad, be careful." I hung up and looked at Victor. "Your half-brother is our CFO. He's been engineering a financial trap for years. When Rourke pushes the button, the company won't just change hands, it might collapse." Victor ran his hands through his hair. He always had a backup plan. Rourke, he never plays one angle when he can play five. If Daniel has been inside, there could be more. Sleepers, people in legal, in operations. You need to assume the boardroom is compromised. That was the moment when it got worse. Because if the board was already stacked with Rourke loyalists, even the photographs might not be enough. I would need proof of fraud, of criminal conspiracy, something that would force the SEC to step in and freeze Rourke's shares before the vote. And the only smoking gun was in that safety deposit box. We reached the First Heritage Bank in Portland just after 9 the next morning. The box was in a vault below ground. Agatha's key turned in the lock with a sound like a clock starting. Inside were 3 items: a thick envelope of photographs, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter from Eleanor. I opened the letter first. Her handwriting, that slant I knew. "Frank, these photographs are the originals. They show Martin Rourke with David Keene and a young woman in a room in Atlantic City, 1991. The woman is unconscious. The photographs were taken by a private investigator who later died in suspicious circumstances. Rourke has been hunting these for 30 years because they prove he drugged and assaulted a woman, and that David Keene was a witness. He blackmailed Keene until Keene died, then came for me. The USB drive contains financial records linking Rourke to the shell companies he used to buy shares in your company and to illegal offshore accounts. This is the weapon, Frank. Use it now." I looked at the photographs. Even with the grimness of the subject, I understood their power. They were the lever that could break Rourke forever, and the USB drive was the evidence that would tie his criminal money to his corporate raiding. But as I lifted the USB drive, my phone buzzed. It was Clara. Her voice was shaking. "Dad, they've called an emergency board meeting. It's happening in 2 hours. Daniel Rourke just filed a motion of no confidence against you, citing financial irregularities he's been fabricating. The board is already half in his pocket. If you're not here to present a defense, they'll vote you out and install Martin Rourke as interim CEO. 2 hours. I was 1,000 miles away with the only weapon that could save everything, and the war had already started without me. I looked at the USB drive in my hand, then at Victor. "We're not going to make it back," I said, "but we don't need to. We just need to send the evidence in time." The bank manager, a woman named Florence, who had been watching us with nervous curiosity, let me use her scanner and encrypted email. Within 10 minutes, the photographs, the financial records, and a digital copy of Eleanor's letter were flying through secure lines to Crawley's laptop and to Clara's phone. I called Clara and told her to get to the boardroom and plug the USB into the projector. "Make sure every single board member sees it before the vote," I said. "And tell Crawley to have the authorities on standby." Then I sat in the bank's small conference room with Victor beside me, a video link open on my tablet. Clara had set up her own camera, aimed at the boardroom table. I watched the scene unfold from 1,000 miles away, like a ghost haunting my own company. The Colleton Enterprises boardroom was packed. 11 directors sat around the polished oak table, some confused, some already wearing the smug expressions of men who had been promised something. Daniel Rourke stood at the head, a laser pointer in hand, charts on the screen behind him showing fabricated revenue dips and phantom accounting errors. He was polished, articulate, and every inch his father's son. Martin Rourke sat in a guest chair near the window, one leg crossed, watching his creation perform. He didn't know that his empire was about to collapse on live video. Daniel concluded his motion. The company is bleeding, and the current leadership has concealed it. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Frank Colleton and the installation of a new CEO. A murmur rippled through the room. One director, a man named Hartwell, who had always been too eager to please, seconded the motion. That was when Clara stood up. She walked to the head of the table, carrying her laptop. "Before you vote," she said, her voice clear and steady, "you need to see something. This board has been lied to, but not by my father." She plugged in the USB. The screen flickered. The first image appeared, a bank statement showing transfers from a shell company to an account belonging to Daniel Rourke's personal holdings. Then the second, a series of photographs, older, grainier, but unmistakable. Martin Rourke and a woman who was unconscious, a man identified as David Keene standing frozen in the background. The third image was a coroner's report linking that woman, Iris Vance, to a suspicious death 3 months after the photos were taken. The fourth document detailed shell companies that traced directly back to Martin Rourke's acquisition of 23% of Colleton stock, funded through offshore accounts that had never been disclosed. Daniel's face went pale. Martin uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, his smile gone. Clara continued, reading from the USB file that Crawley had prepared. Iris Vance was Victor's biological mother. She was assaulted and then silenced. Martin Rourke used the crime to blackmail David Keene and later my stepmother Eleanor for decades. The money that bought his shares was laundered through 3 countries. And Daniel, the man who just told you this company is bleeding, has been funneling internal financial data to his father for years, preparing for this takeover. A director gasped. Hartwell looked as if he had swallowed a wasp. Marcus Lyle, the one I'd called in a favor from, stood up and slammed his hand on the table. I moved to table the vote of no confidence and instead call for an immediate resolution to remove Daniel Rourke from his position and refer all evidence to federal authorities. The motion passed by a show of hands. Every single hand went up, even Hartwell's, trembling with self-preservation. Martin Rourke rose from his chair, his composure cracking for the first time since I'd seen him. "You think this is over? I own shares. I have rights. You own shares bought with criminal proceeds," Crawley said from his seat at the far end of the table. "The SEC has been notified. They'll be freezing those shares within the hour. You don't own anything anymore, Mr. Rourke. You never did." Then the doors opened. 2 federal agents and a representative from the district attorney's office walked in. Martin Rourke's eyes locked on the video camera I was watching through, and I saw the full weight of 30 years of schemes dissolve into panic. He tried to walk past them, but they blocked his path. Daniel tried to back toward the side door, but another agent was already there. Both men were led out in handcuffs, past the directors, past Clara, who didn't flinch. Victor sat beside me, watching his father and his half-brother arrested on a screen. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "I'm glad I'm not them." I put a hand on his shoulder. It was the first time in his life, I think, that the touch of a father didn't feel like a test. We returned to the city the next morning. Clara met me at the airport with a smile that was tired but real. "The board wants to confirm you as chairman permanently," she said, "and they want me to step into a vice chair role if I'm willing." "What did you tell them?" I said yes, on one condition. She paused, glancing at Victor, that Victor be given a chance to work from the ground up in the logistics division. No nepotism, no shortcuts. He starts in the warehouse and works his way up, same as anyone else. Victor blinked. "You'd do that after everything?" Clara looked at him evenly. "You were used, Victor, and you chose to help us. That doesn't erase what you did, but it opens a door. Whether you walk through it is up to you." He nodded slowly, something weighty settling behind his eyes. "Then I'll walk through." The next week, I finally visited Eleanor's grave with the letter in my hand. The sky was a washed-out gray, and the cemetery was quiet except for the wind moving through the oak trees. I knelt and placed a copy of the letter beside her headstone, then stayed there for a long while, remembering the sound of her laugh, the way she'd tap her fingers on the kitchen counter when she was thinking. She had carried a burden that would have crushed most people, and she'd done it to protect me and Clara. I had spent years believing I was the shield of my family, and all along she had been the one holding the line. But there was one more thing in that safety deposit box, a detail I haven't told you yet. At the bottom of the envelope, under the photographs and the USB drive, was a small velvet pouch. Inside was a key to a different safety deposit box, this one at a bank in the city, and a note in Eleanor's handwriting. "This is for Clara. The fortune I'm leaving her isn't just the company's shares. It's a trust I started building the day she called me Mom for the first time. It's in her name alone, funded by every dollar I managed to keep hidden from Rourke. I never told anyone because I wanted her to have something no blackmail could touch. Tell her I loved her from the moment I met her. I gave Clara the key that evening. She opened the box and found a trust worth $8.7 million, accumulated quietly over 16 years. She cried for a long time, and then she laughed, because Eleanor had managed, even in the grip of blackmail, to build a future her daughter could hold on to without fear. The company survived. Martin Rourke was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, blackmail, and conspiracy, and will spend the rest of his natural life in a federal prison. Daniel Rourke made a deal, testified against his father, and is serving a reduced sentence. Victor started in the warehouse the following Monday, wearing steel-toed boots and a work jacket. He's still there, still showing up every morning. Clara tells me he's different now, quieter in the way people become when they stop performing and start living. As for me, I still drive my Toyota Tacoma with the cracked mirror, still wear the flannel, still water my tomatoes on Wednesday mornings. Some things don't need to change. But every so often, when the evening light hits the kitchen just right, I can feel Eleanor there, not as a weight, but as a quiet presence that says, "You did right by me." And that, I've learned, is a fortune no DNA test can measure and no blackmail can steal. Here's the thing about inheritance that most people never understand. It isn't about the money. It's about who gets to tell the story after you're gone. Martin Rourke spent 30 years trying to write himself into my family's history. And in the end, he wrote himself into a prison cell. But the real victory wasn't the courtroom. It was the morning I drove past the warehouse and saw Victor, the boy who had once sat across from me with a DNA test and a demand for everything, loading pallets with a crew that didn't care who his father was. They only cared if he showed up. He does. And that matters more than any document a lawyer could draft. There's a version of this story where I lost. where I walked into that dinner with the Hales, into that will reading with Victor, without having done the quiet work beforehand, without having paid attention to the things that didn't quite fit, without having trusted the small voice that said, "Look closer." That version would have ended with my company carved up, my daughter's legacy stolen, and Eleanor's sacrifice buried under lies. The only reason that didn't happen is because I've always believed that preparation is a form of love. You can't protect people if you're not willing to do the unglamorous work before the crisis arrives. But the lingering question that stays with me, and maybe with you, is this. How many Eleanors are out there right now, carrying secrets under the weight of blackmail, waiting for someone to notice? How many families have a truth hiding in a safety deposit box, waiting for the right person to turn a key? Eleanor was the strongest person I ever knew, and she still couldn't tell me while she was alive. That's the insidious genius of blackmail. It doesn't just steal your money or your peace, it steals your voice. It convinces you that telling the truth will destroy the people you love, so you carry the destruction inside yourself instead. And all the while, the person holding the strings gets richer. I think about that man Rourke, sitting in a cell now, and I wonder if he ever understood what he really took from this world. It wasn't just money. It was years of my wife's laughter that could have been free of fear. It was a boy growing up believing his worth was tied to a fortune he'd inherit by deception. It was a brother, Daniel, who followed a dark path because that was the only path his father offered. Some men build things, other men unbuild them. Rourke was an unbuilder. But buildings can be rebuilt if the foundation is true. My foundation was Eleanor. Even when I didn't know it, she was laying bricks for me, for Clara, even for Victor. A boy who wasn't hers but whom she raised anyway because she believed that care was stronger than blood. I used to think that the best revenge was living well. Now I think the best revenge is living honestly, because the truth, once it's out, keeps working. It works on your enemies, but it also works on you. If you've been listening to this story and found something in it that you needed to hear, you're not alone. Stories like this, real stories about families, betrayal, and the quiet battles people fight behind closed doors, they remind us that we're all navigating something. And, if you want more of them, do me one small favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it tells this channel that you value the kind of story that doesn't flinch from the hard parts. Most people who watch never do it, and they miss out on what comes next. So if you're still here, thank you. That means more than you probably know. I'm Frank Culleton, and if you'll excuse me, I've got tomatoes to water.